The headlines said it was over. The government said prices were stabilizing. The Fed said they won. So you took a breath. Maybe you stopped watching the prices as closely. Maybe you started to feel like things were finally turning around. And then you went to the grocery store. In the next 15 minutes, I'm going to show you, clearly, simply, and honestly, whether inflation is actually over. What the data really says, what they're not telling you, and what you need to do right now to protect yourself. Because the answer is not what most people think. Let's start with what actually happened. Inflation in the United States peaked at 9.1% in June 2022. That was the highest inflation rate in 40 years. The Federal Reserve responded by raising interest rates 11 times between 2022 and 2023. 11 times. The most aggressive hiking cycle in decades. And it worked. By the end of 2025, inflation had dropped all the way down to 2.7%, getting close to the Fed's 2% target. Economists were calling it a soft landing, a victory. The crisis, they said, was behind us. And then March 2026 arrived. In a single month, inflation jumped back up to 3.3%, the largest monthly increase since June 2022. Gasoline prices spiked 21% in 1 month. Energy overall jumped nearly 11%. 1 month. That's how fast the calm broke. So, is inflation over? Here's the most honest answer I can give you. The emergency phase is behind us, but the problem isn't solved. And the conditions that created it in the first place, they didn't go away. They went quiet. And now, some of them are waking back up. Let me show you exactly what I mean. Before anything else, I need you to understand one thing, because without this, none of the rest of it makes sense. Inflation coming down from 9% to 2.7% does not mean prices went back down. It means prices stopped rising as fast. Everything that got expensive is still expensive. Your grocery bill didn't shrink. Your rent didn't fall. Your insurance didn't go back to what it was in 2020. Think about it this way. If I gave you $100 in 2020 and sent you to the grocery store, you came back with a full cart. By 2024, that same $100 barely fills half of it. Cumulative inflation hit 21.2% over those 4 years. The all-food CPI rose 23.6%. Inflation slowing down didn't undo any of that. The price clock did not reset. And here's what makes it even more painful. Real wages, meaning what your paycheck actually buys after adjusting for inflation, declined by 0.7% between January 2021 and the end of 2024. Wages grew 19.7%, but prices rose 21.5%. You might have gotten raises, multiple raises, and still ended up behind. That's not a personal failure, that's arithmetic. Now, the Fed does deserve some credit. Let me be fair. They raised rates 11 times. They cooled the economy. They brought inflation from 9% down to 2.7%. They kept unemployment low while doing it. That's genuinely hard to do. Most economists said it couldn't be done. But here's the question nobody is asking loudly enough. Did they solve inflation, or did they pause it? Because there's a difference, a big one. Solving it means the conditions that caused it are gone. Pausing it means those conditions are still there, just quieter for now. And when I look at the data, I see a pause, not a solution. Here's why. The national debt is now almost $39 trillion. Let that number sit for a second. It grew by nearly $3 trillion in the last year alone. That's $7.5 billion every single day. $114,000 for every single American. The interest payments on that debt, just the interest, now exceed $1 trillion every year. That makes interest on the national debt the third largest expenditure in the entire federal budget, behind only Social Security and Medicare, larger than defense. When a government is carrying that much debt, the temptation to inflate it away never fully disappears. Because inflation, at its core, is a way of making old debts cheaper to pay back in devalued dollars. That's not a conspiracy theory, that's basic monetary economics. And that debt isn't going anywhere. Shelter costs, the single biggest slice of most American budgets, are still rising. Housing makes up 34% of the Consumer Price Index. And as of early 2026, shelter inflation is still running at 3% annually, still above the Fed's target, still going up. If you're renting, your landlord is still raising your rent. If you bought in 2021 or 2022, you're locked into a peak price with a high interest rate mortgage. Either way, the relief isn't here yet. And then there are the new forces, the ones that weren't part of the original inflation story, but are now. The first one is tariffs. For 30 years, cheap goods from China and Asia kept American prices low. That era is ending. New tariffs introduced in 2025 are already pushing import prices higher. The US Import Price Index rose 0.8% in March 2026 alone. When it costs more to bring goods into the country, those costs don't disappear. They get passed to you at the register every week. Deglobalization is inflationary, and it's already happening. The second force is energy. We already know energy isn't just your gas tank. It's the cost of food, shipping, manufacturing, every product on every shelf. In March 2026, gasoline spiked 21% in a single month. That's what pushed inflation back up to 3.3%. 1 month of energy volatility undid months of progress on the inflation numbers. Energy is the canary in the coal mine, and right now that canary is singing loudly. The third force is government spending. The federal deficit for fiscal year 2026 has already hit $1.2 trillion, and we're only halfway through the year. Annual deficits are projected to reach $1.9 trillion for the full year, and grow to $3.1 trillion by 2036 under current law. Every dollar the government spends beyond what it collects in taxes either adds to that debt or eventually gets monetized. More money in circulation, chasing the same amount of goods. You already know where that ends. We talked about it in the last video. The pizza never gets bigger. They just keep printing more people to eat it. So here's where we actually are, as of April 2026. The 9% emergency is behind us. Real. Inflation dropped to 2.7%. Real. And then in 1 month, it jumped back to 3.3%. Also real. The national debt is almost $39 trillion and growing by billions every day. Real. Tariffs are pushing import prices up. Real. Energy is volatile and unpredictable. Real. Real wages have only just started recovering and are now under threat again. Real. We were in the eye of the storm. The calm was real. But the data says the other side is arriving. Here's what you do about it. First, do not relax your financial defenses. This is not the moment to go back to leaving your savings in a low-interest account and assuming everything is fine. The emergency may be over, the risk is not. Inflation-protected assets, I-bonds, TIPS, real estate, hard assets, still belong in a serious financial strategy. Not because panic, but because the data says the threat isn't gone. Second, lock in your fixed costs wherever you can. Fixed-rate mortgage over variable. Long-term contracts over month to month. Lock in what you can at today's prices. When inflation comes back, and March 2026 suggests it might, fixed costs are your friend. Variable costs are your enemy. The person on a fixed rate wins. The person on a variable rate absorbs every increase. That's not complicated, but most people don't act on it until it's too late. Third, watch these three numbers. If you want to know whether inflation is coming back before the headlines tell you, these are your early warning signals. The M2 money supply. When this starts expanding rapidly, inflation historically follows within 12 to 18 months. Track it for free on the Federal Reserve's FRED database. Oil and energy prices. March 2026 just reminded us how fast energy moves everything else. Watch it every week. When oil spikes, your cost of living follows. The 10-year Treasury yield. This is the bond market's best guess at where inflation is headed. When it rises, bond investors are pricing in more inflation ahead. The bond market usually sees it coming before the news does. These three numbers tell you more about where inflation is going than any government press release ever will. The storm of 2021 and 2022 was brutal. You felt it. Most Americans still feel the damage from it. And for a while, it genuinely looked like it was passing. Inflation at 2.7%. Wages slowly recovering. A real reason to breathe. Then March 2026, 1 month, 3.3%. Gasoline up 21%. The eye of a storm is the most dangerous moment, because everything feels calm. The wind stops, the sky clears, and that's exactly when people stop paying attention. Don't stop paying attention. Understand what's happening. Watch the indicators. Protect your purchasing power. Because in a world where financial decisions compound over years and decades, the people who see it coming have an enormous advantage over the people who find out after the fact. If this gave you something real, subscribe. Because next week we're going even deeper. What happens to your money when the Fed starts cutting interest rates? Because what the Fed giveth, the Fed can taketh away. And the next rate cut cycle could reshape your finances in ways most Americans won't see coming. You need to understand it before it happens. I'll see you in the next one.